Welcome back, everyone, to episode 118 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. I'm joined once again by the Hall of Famer, Jason Bryant. Jason, what's going on?
Just another glorious day in New Brighton where the snow will not leave until April.
Well, we were talking before the show, and you either made a wise or a very unwise move with your daughter yesterday. You're feeling the after effects, what you were saying, right?
Yeah, so here in Minnesota, we find ways to, and I'm still learning this as we go, to maximize indoor space, because once it snows, yeah, there's some outdoor activities, but once it gets really cold, you're kind of really limited in how much time you can do. We spent about 10 minutes outside walking around the corner to the neighbors. Three brothers have built this giant whale. And for the past 6 or 7 years, they've had a shark, they've had a turtle, they've had an octopus, they've had all sorts, and it's made national news. So we walked over there, and it's like 10 degrees. Like, we got to find something to do inside with the girls, because it was a holiday. They were off from school. We got to keep them, that pent up energy. So we went to a trampoline park, and there are two of them within a reasonable 5-minute drive of where I'm at. So we tried the other one, and then we do the Chick-fil-A dinner thing, because there's another indoor play place the kids can go, and of course, who doesn't like Chick-fil-A? So we plug aside. So I go out, and there's the trampoline park, and I'm 40 years old. Things don't work like they used to. We all get a case of the used to coulds, and I'm bouncing around on the, from trampoline to trampoline. And at one point I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I'm like, all right, I'm sitting around 245 pounds. So I'm not completely out of shape, but I'm like, bouncing from trampoline to trampoline, and I'm looking over, I'm like, yeah, I feel pretty good. I can do some of these things with my kids and chasing them down. And then I look over, and there's the warrior course, and I'm like, oh boy, I don't even think I could go through across a set of monkey bars right now. But here's the thing about the trampoline park: when you turn 40 and you're not really an active athlete, the next morning sucks. So I'm a little stiff, I'm a little sore, so I'm trying to work and utilize the standing desk, the sit-stand desk that I bought, to kind of work my legs out a little bit, because the ankles, they got to work out, the calves got to work out, and my kids loved it. They were out like a light last night after dinner time. So mission accomplished in getting the kids to sleep. My wife and I got a chance to watch a little bit more of The Office. We're binging that right now. So all in all, if you need your kids to go to sleep and you want a good workout, trampoline parks, hey, not a bad hour's worth of your time.
As we all know, the biggest part of parenting is suffering for our kids' happiness, right? That's the biggest thing. So it's got to be worthwhile. Speaking of utilizing indoor activities, I know there's a bunch of anticipation for the NCAA tournament, coming up to Minneapolis. I'm thrilled. I'm ecstatic. I think, with being in a football stadium, I think is going to introduce a lot of unique elements to the championship that we've never seen. But I think the one concern is from people is like, what's the weather going to be like? Can you...
Well, here's the thing. We have been in some pretty cold climates the last couple of years. St. Louis is generally pretty mild at this time of year, but the first year we went to St. Louis, after it was announced, it was like, okay, what was the temperature? The first 2 days of the 3 days in St. Louis, it was warmer in Minneapolis. Now, the last day in St. Louis, it was in the 60s. It was beautiful. The next year, well, Cleveland. Oh, that wind coming off the lake, it was so cold in Cleveland. It was warmer in Minneapolis than it was in Cleveland. Then last year, Pittsburgh, warmer in Minneapolis than it was in Pittsburgh that same weekend. So you're going to get comparable weather to what you've gotten for pretty much forever for the third weekend in March, because the last, I think, warm weather or climate, you can really look at was Oklahoma City, and it's kind of warm. St. Louis, hit or miss. I think the weather worries is overblown. Most places in the upper Midwest, yeah, you can get hit with a snowstorm in March, but it really is rather, mid 30s, low 40s that time of year typically. There'll still be snow on the ground. There'll still be some slush to get through, but, it doesn't completely all go away until April. But I think the worries about, the snow and the weather are completely overblown. Plus, if you're not, strong enough to go outside in the wintertime in Minnesota, well, we've got skyways. Most of the places that are built downtown with hotels, you don't even have to go outside. So in a sport that's known for its toughness, I've certainly seen a lot of belly aching about the weather. I just don't get it. I make no Minnesota in January right now, you'd hate it. It sucks. Okay. This would be terrible right now. Nobody wants to go outside when it's 1 below in the morning, okay? Don't believe we're going to have that in March. So rest assured, you're probably going to bring a nice little Columbia jacket or something like that, or get yourself a RUDIS jacket and wear it into the facility. But otherwise, I think the worries about the weather are going to be overblown. Boy, I hope this doesn't bite me in the ass, by the way.
I was going to say, like, you're going out there on a limb, but the one thing is, like, I'm the first to admit, like, there's a reason why I was a wrestler and a wrestling coach, because I can't stand being cold. Like, that's just one of the things about me. But, everything that you just kind of like, laid out for us, I think something fun before the NCAA tournament is maybe do like part of a podcast, doing a preview show, like a visitor guide to Minneapolis, what to look out for, what to be aware of, good eating spots, all those things. Like, I don't know if you've been reading my tweets on that, because those of you that know me, I've got a network of shows at Mad Talk Online. And one of the things I've actually already planned for my short time podcast, and maybe we could even tie it into the RUDIS show. We can figure that out, because there's different strokes for different folks. I'm a craft beer snob. And in my studio, I'm building the bar, which if you're watching the video component, the bar has not been built behind me, but there will be a bar setting, and there is a fridge for Minnesota craft beer. Now, if you happen to come visit, you're from Iowa, you're going to drink the Busch Light that I'm going to have down here, because that doesn't usually get drank here. But when we're looking, I've already reached out to a show called the Minnesota Beer Cast. It's a local radio show that also has a podcast about the craft beer scene here. We're going to do a collaborative effort. So if you're coming into town and you're a beer snob, we have almost 200 breweries here in Minnesota. And this is something that, having grown up and realizing that when you're at a certain age, you stop drinking for volume and you start drinking for taste. Wow, some of this stuff is pretty good. I've also reached out to one of the food critics here that has a show on My Talk 1071. Yeah, that's the one my wife listens to. And we're going to talk about the restaurants. So a couple of those things are already in the works here on my side of the Mad Talk Podcast Network. So maybe we can also get another version of it as, okay, what's near the facility for the wrestling fans to hoard between breaks? Because there's a lot of cool stuff that are right around the area, and a Skyway walkway, or even a quick Uber. So there's a lot of stuff to do in downtown Minneapolis. It is a cool city. Yeah, and I think that's what I kind of enjoy. And now that I'm out of coaching, I'm starting to, the old adage in wrestling is, I got to see the world, but I only saw wrestling gyms around the world, right? And so I think, the unique part of, what's interesting to me now that I'm out of coaching is like actually experiencing what a city is about, as opposed to just seeing what the venue is. And I know, one of the large attractions wherever you go is like, exploring the local venues, local culture. And I've always enjoyed every time that I traveled up to Minnesota to wrestle the Gophers. Love spending time in Minneapolis. I think it's going to be an amazing host city. I think we're in for a treat, and it's exciting. It's going to be exciting to share it with you moving forward here.
Yeah, one thing, you get right out of the airport, there's the Mall of America. You don't even have to leave the airport. You hop on a light rail. You can be at the Mall of America in about 5 minutes. So that's one of the things that are unique to that area. Matter of fact, when Super Bowl 52 came through here last year, that was where the media center was. Like when I got my media credentials to go down and interview players and such for those 3 days that I was down there, all of that was based out of the Mall of America. They had the 2 hotels connected to it. And it was really kind of cool to see a media operation there from MOA. So that's one of the places that people tend to go. And then, you've got the Twin Cities. There's things in St. Paul it's a quick ride away, and then there's things in downtown Minneapolis. So that's one thing about this city is, as a transplant, I'm from like the Hampton Roads, Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. I'm used to more temperate winters. So and then when we get to what we see, the food can't be understated, because when we went to Philly, what did everybody want to get? A cheesesteak. We went to Cleveland. There was all sorts of a couple places, like Cincinnati's known for that awful Skyline chili. Then you've also got what are you known for? Last year in Pittsburgh, Permane Brothers and a Yingling Lager, or as we say it where its proper name in Lancaster, just lager. So
lager.
I think the food's a big part. Minnesota, it's going to be the Juicy Lucy. So there's a couple spots there for that.
Nice. So as a venue itself, and I think I want to get into the wrestling, but the more we start talking about Minneapolis, the venue itself, I think the last stat I saw that, there's been more than 40,000 tickets sold. What's the latest update on that? Do you have
that? I have not heard. I know that I did reach out to Anthony Holman at the NCAA to see if there was going to be another site visit, because when they had site visits here, I was actually out of the country or doing something. I was gone when they came and did the site visit. So I have not seen it firsthand. And I know they've got the NCAA convention coming up this week, which we're going to probably see women's wrestling listed or get approved as an emerging sport, but more on that later, because it's a busy time for the NCAA. But no, I have not seen any official ticket numbers. I know that single session tickets have been started to drip out there. I've seen Facebook ads that are sponsored legit from the NCAA about single session tickets now starting to be on sale, because previously it was just the full single session or the full 6 session pass. So I made sure I picked up a couple extra tickets for my family that are going to be able to see it for the first time. But no new news on the number, at least not at this point from where I sit.
Gotcha. And I one follow-up to that, and I don't know if you have any insight to that. I know some concerns would be, with the scope and the size of the venue, like how are the sight lines going to be? Are they going to utilize the video boards within the arena? Some things that I assume, but I don't know. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, one thing that the NCAA are really high on is from a student athlete perspective, the space that they're going to have now. All that back of house stuff gets kind of cramped. You're always looking for space for a student athlete lounge, those type of things. The athletes are kind of hanging out in the end zone in some of the stands. Well, all that extra space that they have for a student athlete perspective and the coaching staff that's going to clear up a lot of the congestion that's usually underneath. So that's one benefit. So that floor space isn't going to be jammed with bags and wrestlers just kind of sprawled out and such. Sometimes when you get in the end zone, plus it's going to open up some seating. But in terms of the video boards, yeah, they've got. Again, I have not been in the facility yet because I'm not a Vikings fan, so I've had no reason to go in there, and I missed my chance at the X Games. But the video boards are going to be a huge component to it. I mean, there's going to be a lot of natural light. And that's one thing that's unique about the facility is it's got a glass ceiling. So you're going to get some natural light in there. You're not just going to be sitting there looking at, having those fluorescent bulbs staring you in the face all day. So your eyes aren't going to be as strained as people think they are, because they're going to need binoculars, as they say. It seems like the sight lines is one thing that it kind of irks me too. Is like, have you ever been to a football game? I mean, are you complaining about not, okay, yeah, the pylon on the far end of the end zone where you're sitting, that's a little bit tough. But at the same point, you'll have like 100-foot video board or whatever it is there to see everything too. And, I can only see one mat at a time. How many people are actually watching more than one mat at a time? Okay, you can kind of pay attention to 2 at a time, but I just think some of these worries about being able to see or I can only watch this at a time. Well, you're only watching that at a time anyway. You got 2 eyes. You're not like a catfish or an iguana. You can chameleon and look at 2 in one way. So let's just simmer down on the doomsday Chicken Little skies falling scenarios, people. This is going to be the first time it's been on a football field since you and I in '97, and it's going to be laid out a little bit different. The mats are going to be they're not going to be jammed together in an 8 box and then all this extra space. There's going to be separation between the 8 mats. So for photographers, you're going to see some great shots. You're going to see unobstructed views. You're going to have plenty of table space and things of that nature. You're not going to be crashing across into the next mat next to you. So athlete safety is going to be improved. If you're focusing on one mat's going to be improved. I just think some of these doomsday scenarios that, you haven't seen it yet. So how do you know what it's going to be like? I just think sometimes common sense kind of escapes us when wrestling people want to complain about things that it's going to be the worst thing ever. Come on.
And then, there's a level of frustration there, because I think as a wrestling community, we're always looking for more. We want more visibility. We want more exposure. We want to be, in different places. Well, you got what you asked for. We wanted bigger places. You get an NFL stadium.
Do the people want to, and some of the things I'm getting are from people who have had their seats for 25, 30 years, and they've gotten to the point where they're in with the right team, or their donations to the Hall of Fame or the NWCA or to where they are, where they get the really good seats. Well, all of a sudden they're not going to have as great a seat in their perspective as somebody else. So, it's great to add all these more people, but you're affecting me. It would be great if you had more, but you don't affect me. Come on. It's one of these years. This is going to be something that it's a real, how else are we going to know something works or doesn't work if we don't try it? And it's not like we're going to a smaller facility. We're not, making this more of an exclusive event. We're opening it up to thousands of more wrestling fans that are never had the opportunity to see this thing. The barrier to entry for the NCAA championships from a ticket perspective is enormous for somebody in their 20s, especially, we talk about student loan debt right now. An all session ticket I think it's $325. Well, how many college students have that much, $325 lying around? They're still trying to buy Busch Light because, again, they're drinking for quantity, not quality. So back in the day, you had these on college campuses, and it was easy to get a ticket in terms of it was affordable. That's where all these people started going. And that's the one thing I really don't understand is, like, we want the sport to grow, but not at the expense of my vantage point. It's just kind of seems somewhat selfish to a point.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of consistency in the wrestling community because we will get into, and we have gotten into in the past, about those same discussions with the wrestling coaches saying, hey, we want this for our sport, but I only want it if it doesn't affect me. To take case in point, national duels, one semester sport, yada, yada. You can go all down the lines. Like, when are we going to, that's always been my problem when I was in the coaching profession is, regardless of the issue, do I have the resolve to make the decision to do what's right for the sport and not for my program? And I think there's a lot of things that go into that. And I just jumped in randomly with that thought. But, I think what we're saying, some of the frustrations we have from a fan perspective, I think we have the same frustrations from coaches. Like, okay, I'm willing. Yes, I want this for the sport. I want the sport to be better. I want it to grow, improve, strengthen, but only if it aligns with what my views are about what's good for the sport and good for my program, right?
It depends on, you have a tournament team this year. Do you have a dual meet team this year? It depends on where your strengths are. We got no superstars, but we got 10 hammers. Well, I'm in favor of a dual meet format. Well, we got 3 studs and, you're getting beat 7 out of 10 matches. Well, we're a tournament team. I think Ben brought this up too about how bad his team was that one year when he was coaching at Arizona State. There were 6 in the country, and they lost to a Division II team in a dual meet that year. So there's those type of things. But again, wrestling is an inherently selfish sport. It's kind of in our DNA, because to be a successful athlete, you have to be extremely selfish and put everything else aside and focus on yourself and focus on your training. And I think some of that mentality might just bleed off. Okay, well, we're worried about us. I got to worry about me. I got a team to run. These are my guys. I'm not worried about the 78 other programs. And I really wish, we do have people that do this. We have coaches that are putting the sport ahead of their program. But we also, and then when they start winning, does that change? Do they stop putting their sport ahead? Okay, I'm winning now, and now my attitude has changed a little bit because, well, things are different, or I've got a little bit more funding. I've got this stud. I just wish we were more sport first, and we don't like to make the hard decision. We don't like change. The phrase that, well, that's the way it's always been done, is prevailing in our sport, I think, more than other places. And I've covered 12 different sports. It's not like I've been pigeonholed into wrestling my entire life. So I just, like I said, I wish we would be, a little forward thinking about what can we do to make this, more than we want it to be. Some of us are fine being a niche sport. Some of us are with fine. Okay, we're on TV once a year. We get the Olympics every 4 years. Yeah, let us do our own thing. And we don't need the casual fan. We don't need this and that. Well, somebody's going to have to replace those fans that have been sitting in those seats for 30 and 40 years. And if we don't have new blood and we don't have a vision that's changing and evolving like the other sports have, the NBA's attendance in the 70s and 80s was atrocious. Then some exciting guy named Michael Jordan came on. They're adding 3-point contests and dunk contests to the All-Star game. Things that were enacted by the ABA in the 70s that look, it worked then, now it's going to work now. It's got a bigger crowd. David Stern changed the way the whole sport was marketed. All of a sudden, the NBA is a popular product. It was crap at one point. I don't want us to be crap, because we have a great product. We have to be able to find ways to market it to a sport that's typically not done a great job at marketing itself in large. So soapbox over there for a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to, as a sport, you really have to prioritize and pinpoint where you want to grow. And I think, being in a lot of the coaches' conventions and hearing the narratives year in and year out, sometimes it just seems like there's no continuity or consistency, or we regurgitate the same arguments every year. And when are we going to grow with the legislation, grow new opportunities, and then follow through with them as well, right? But we're digressing way off of wrestling again. One of the things that I did want to talk about was talking about a great dual meet team that we're not so sure what they're going to play out, but I wanted to talk about Virginia Tech a little bit. Is there a less talked about top 5 team in the country right now? Because they're 8-0. I think they started the preseason right around in between.
They were in the 14-15 range, I believe.
Yeah, right around the 15. I don't think anybody saw this coming from the Hokies, especially with Mekhi Lewis taking an Olympic red shirt. McFadden going down from 74 to 65. I don't think any of us thought we would be discussing, and I don't think anybody is discussing the Hokies right now. But they're 8-0. They are ranked 3rd in the country right now, and the job that Tony Roby continues to do is amazing to me.
Yeah, let's go back and look. See, 2020. I've got the rankings database here. Of course, in case you're wondering, I have every college poll from the coaches poll ever at my disposal. They started the year ranked 16th in the country, now number 3, which is tied for the highest placement they've had in school history. Now, one thing, they're without Mekhi Lewis. They also lost Brent Moore for the year, and I'll be talking to Tony Roby on my Inside Virginia Tech Wrestling show here about that. And then they've pulled Bryce Andonian's red shirt. Of course, Joey Prada's coming on. He's had, he lost 2 years of injuries. He's now getting back into shape. Colin Girardi, really solid redshirt freshman. But you look at him and where's their tournament points coming from? They're going to be Hunter Bolin and David McFadden, and then you're going to hope these guys can break through. Mitch Moore has the opportunity to put up big points, but again, he's one of those up and down guys. He can pin anybody, or he can find himself losing to a guy in a tight match that he probably should have won. So Tech's ceiling, I don't know. From a tournament team, and 2 guys in the top 3 are definitely going to put you in that top 15 range from a tournament point, but you're going to need a lot more supporting cast from a tournament point, which is. As a dual meet team, they went up, they blasted Binghamton. We didn't get to see the match we wanted to see at 184, and then Cornell, which had just come off a win at Rutgers. And, admittedly Cornell's down, but, Virginia Tech's putting everybody, in the loss column they see in front of them. NC State's an undefeated team in the ACC. 2 of the last 3 teams in this country right now that are unbeaten are in the ACC. So Virginia Tech's number 3, and NC State, not a whole lot has been talked about them too at number 5 at 10-0. So,
and that's another team in NC State in the Wolfpack with Pat Papalizio's team that, again, like 2 years ago when they had a great dual meet team, it seems to be similar this year. They have a very strong dual meet team, but I'm not sure how many points they're going to be able to generate come tournament time. I think they've got probably more potential than the Hokies do on their roster, but how much more and what is their ceiling going to be? That's another good question, but that I'd like to hear your thoughts about the Hokies as well. I'm concerned as well. With NC State, I'm concerned as well. Not concerned. I shouldn't feel bad. Like Tony Roby's got a great team this year. It just doesn't look like he necessarily has a great tournament team, which they've pretty much had, for the last 6 to 8 years, a really great tournament squad. But it's only going to take, I think with Bolin and McFadden, they've got 2 high point scores. If they can sneak one other guy inside the top 5, that's definitely going to probably position them top 10 somewhere, anywhere from 5 to 10. Not probably enough to get them inside the top 5, but definitely comfortably in the top 10. But that's contingent upon them getting, one more podium placer. Now with the Wolfpack, I think there's probably a number of guys that have more upside than the outside the obvious guys on Virginia Tech's roster.
Yeah, I think both teams are going to have the same situation where they're going to get guys to the tournament for the first time, and getting to that show, the first time, sometimes you get the deer in the headlights, and sometimes people just raise their level. We saw that with Tariq Wilson. He raised his level a couple years ago. That's a guy that can score some points in a pretty balanced weight class at 141. Of course, we know Hayden is a title contender, Hayden Hidley at 157. But again, guys like Camacho, guys like Trombley, Nick Reenan is not the Nick Reenan we expected to see. That injury, he's still coming back from it. He's taken some losses to people that you really wouldn't expect him to lose to at this point, or real close matches. So he's not quite to the level that I think even Nick or the coaching staff believe he can be up at 97. He's dangerous there. But and then you've got also Trent Hidley. Again, we talked about 184 in the last weight class. Well, how good is that weight class after Zahid Valencia? So those are some question marks. And they've got bodies that can score some points, but where's the bonus points too? You got to have guys that can then pile up those bonus points also if you want to move up 3-4 spots in the lineup or in the top 20, because what's the difference sometimes between 10th and 16th? Well, sometimes it's just 2 points or 1.5, that extra tech fall, that extra fall in consolation round 1 or consolation round 2, wherever you get it.
Yeah, and what I see with NC State right now, it's not that they're not going to get numbers to the tournament. I think they're going to get plenty of numbers there, but what will they actually do? I think we've got a pretty good idea about what we're going to get out of the Hidley brothers. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, guys like the Bullards are also kind of the X factor too, because they have the ability to put people on their backs. They're funky. They can really beat some tough opponents. They've also taken some of those tricky losses too. So it's going to be they're role players, the guys that are okay, it's now your time to shine, and they're going to need to shine.
And my thing when I've got a pinner or a dangerous wrestler, my biggest thing was, how do I get him to be comfortable at the NCAA tournament? Because typically guys just tighten up just a little bit more than they do during the regular season. And if you've got that big move wrestler who's got that big move potential, or he's a pinner, if he goes out, if you can get him wrestling with freedom, and willing to look for the home run and look for the big point move, usually you can gain a lot of momentum at the NCAA tournament if you're willing to go out there with a lot of freedom and guts to hit that big move. I think looking back in my career, there's no better example of that than Quentin Wright. Quentin Wright's a guy, like, I think it's pretty well known. Like, he was never a room wrestler. He was probably arguably the worst practice guy I ever saw.
Jake Herbert might give himself the title there, because Jake always said, I think I lost every single match in the room his entire life. So, if it's not Quentin, Jake's going to put himself at the top of that list.
And I joked around with Jake before about that. It's like, I would pay to see a match against you and Quentin Wright in the room because I don't know who would come out on top. I think you would both be trying to lose that match. But yeah, back to Quentin, he was a guy though, like in the room, just like Jake. I think the beauty about what made them brilliant in competition is they were willing to go compete and try new things in practice. And so they didn't worry about getting beat in practice. So come the big moments, they're like, I'm willing to try anything because I try it every single day in practice. And, you look back at Quentin Wright's run, the Grant Gambrell match in the semifinals where he hits just a standing cradle and that throw in the first period, that far lat throw. But yeah, I'm back to the NC State guys. Like, those are the guys that could move you up the scoreboard pretty quickly if you get those dangerous guys that can secure not only a win but a couple pins for you, give you a couple bonus points. I think that's where I see NC State as having more upside potential come tournament time than a team like Va-Tech does.
Yeah, it's still going to make a good dual meet, though, down the stretch, because those teams are now ending their season with one another, basically to determine the ACC championship. Although North Carolina comes into Blacksburg this weekend, they're ranked 12th in the country. The ACC, for the first time ever, has 4 teams ranked in the top 12. It was 5 of the 6 that were ranked. Virginia fell out of the rankings after losing to Riot at the Virginia Duels, but Carolina's a dangerous out. They did drop the duel early this year to Stanford, but you've got Carolina has given Virginia Tech fits over the years, and this is one thing. This is not something that the Hokies can look past either. This is going to be a good duel this weekend too. Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Blacksburg. Yeah,
and if you're Steve Garland and the Cavaliers, he's like, hey, don't forget about me. I'm one of those teams too. Now I'm not as familiar with Virginia this year as I am with some of the other ACC schools. I know they're ranked in the top 10. Give me some insight about what we can anticipate looking at from the Cavaliers coming the next 2 months.
Well, they fell out of the top 25 in the coaches poll. As far as tournament points, they're going to get those points again with Jack Mueller. Mueller is again kind of on a pitch count, which was interesting because at the Virginia Duels, the 125-pounder who saw time was Patrick McCormick. Does that name sound familiar? Yeah, grandson of Pat McCormick, son of the official Mike McCormick, who wrestled at Virginia from Poquoson, my hometown. So that's the high school that puts on, basically the club that puts on the Virginia Duels. So here's Patch, who grew up in that building, having to wrestle like his first Virginia Duels in college, the first man at the chute. One match he had to wrestle Killing Cardinal, another state champion, the two Virginia state champs from Virginia high schools wrestling against each other, Virginia colleges of the Virginia Duels. No pressure there, Patch, but the side note over. But Mueller's in there. He wrestled last weekend. So again, keeping the weight down, it's a hard pull. So it's one of those things where they're making sure that he's not, we talked about staying healthy the other day, that's one to look at. And Virginia had several starters out at the Virginia Duels, and they've got some good depth to them. And those backups come in, they beat guys. Like Murphy beat Keenan Carr at 149. That's a solid win. Brian Courtney's been hit or miss this year at 141. Then, Louis Hayes is serviceable. Absolutely. He's got talent at 133. He's a guy that I think they expect a little bit more of. But down low, they're pretty dangerous. I remember that duel against Old Dominion, looking at it going, okay, if ODU needs to win this duel, they need to sweep the first four. They lost 3 of the 4. Actually, no, I think they lost all 4. So it's one of those things like, they're formidable in a duel. And, a guy like Mueller's going to give you some points. J. Aiello, another Virginia guy at 197 pounds, really showed some people, a different side of him with that win over Warner at the Midlands. I mean, there is some definite dangerousness there. I mean, Quinn Miller, heavyweight. This is a guy who's very, very, he's a smaller heavyweight, but I'm not going to say he's podium threatening at this point, but he's a guy that's definitely upset potential. He's a bad draw. I think he's going to qualify. So he's a guy that, and he can pin you too. He's pinned people from really strange positions this year. So, Virginia's got, they've still got some walking wounded. Cam Coy was out. He's a guy they expected to have a pretty good career there. So again, nursing injuries, and I think Virginia's not as good right now. They're not as good as they will be probably come the ACC tournament. So he gets those guys back on the mat. Jack Mueller firing, he's going to be there. So, the Cavaliers
I tell you what,
got some depth.
Yeah, I mean that lines up everything for a pretty exciting ACC tournament. I don't think that's quickly becoming a must-see conference to watch. Like, I think it's not for whatever reason. And, I wasn't even aware. And I'm a guy that stays pretty current with all things wrestling. Like, four teams, I don't know if that's ever happened in the history of the ACC. Has it?
No. It's, as I said, the 4 in the top 12.
It's unheard of.
Yeah, 3 in the top 10 had not happened until, it's happened 5 weeks now this year, because Pitt is sitting there at number 10, even though they did just lose to Oklahoma State, fairly convincingly down in Gallagher, Iowa. But, you've had 3 in the top 10 for the last couple of weeks, and then, Carolina sneaking on up. Other teams are losing. They're staying consistent ever since losing that duel against Stanford earlier in the year, and they're sitting there 7-1, 8-1, something like that, and they're sitting at number 12. So, they can really cause a problem with these dual teams at the end of the year.
Yeah. So what else were we looking to? One of the things that I wanted to pick your brain about, I know we got on the topic of ducking, so I don't really want to revisit that as much today, but did want to jump into some of the Big Ten stuff that we didn't get to hit on yesterday with Minnesota's weekend. With Wisconsin and Michigan. Also wanted to jump in to wrap up the show talking about Ohio State a little bit, about where their lineup's looking like, about how that's, materializing. And again, that's another team, one of those teams that is searching for trophy points, right? Because I think Ohio State has firmly established themselves inside the top 4 traditionally for the past decade almost. And now this is the year where, even though they're inside that top 5, again, they've got a little bit more question marks, similar to Penn State this year, than they've normally had. And so I know that Ohio State's trying to play around, stabilize their roster just a little bit more. It looks like they're doing that. It looks as they're taking positive strides forward. But I also wanted to jump into the Big Ten here, kind of wrap up some of the things that we touched on yesterday, but we really didn't get into much depth. But again, I guess we probably should have, with our Minneapolis talk for the first 15 minutes of the show, we should have just jumped onto some Gopher talk. But had some interesting results this weekend.
Yeah, come out and they beat Michigan State, which at this point, first of all, got to give Roger Chandler a little bit of credit there because they're actually making the Spartans more formidable now. I mean, they took Michigan to the wire a couple weeks ago, shut out Maryland the other day. So this is not your basement Michigan State anymore. Roger and his crew are doing a really good job there in East Lansing, getting things turned around. Minnesota beat them. Then they went into Ann Arbor, pretty good crowd there at Chrysler. I think it was Queen Night or something like that. So the Queen theme, but 2,700 people saw Michigan, and then unranked. Knock off Minnesota. Minnesota didn't have Brayton Lee at 157 pounds. Didn't have Gable Steveson. He didn't wrestle either of those duels. And and instead of speculate, I went up straight and I just texted Eggum. I'm like, hey, what's the deal? Well, Brayton Lee got the flu. He got the flu on Wednesday and did not go. And then Gable, he said he got dinged up. I don't know if dinged up's the word. He said he got hurt against Trent Hilger. He said he might have been able to go, but rather than make things, again, this is kind of what we touched on yesterday. Rather than exacerbate an injury or make it worse, he said, it was basically just keep him from, he's probably a week away from going. So I don't feel it was a duck situation because, granted, Mason Parris is on the other end of things. Now, do you go out and, say you're, Robataro, I think was a starter for Michigan State. Okay, yeah, we probably beats him even at 60%, but you're not going to beat Mason Parris at 60%. Now, do you aggravate that injury more at 60% against Mason Parris? So, Eggum basically said he got hurt against Wisconsin and he hopes to have him back this week. No guarantees there, but Brayton Lee did suffer from the flu, man. That's debilitating. So, thankfully, that's wrecking everybody right now. I mean, I just think I heard DeSanto actually won with it the other night. The word is that he was blowing chunks after the match because that third period was very anti-DeSanto like in terms of his motion from that Saturday night duel. But when it comes to that, like I said, Eggum at least answered the question. He's not going to give you. He didn't give me a coach speak answer. He said one guy got hurt, one guy was the flu. So it's one of those situations where it's not like we're just kind of hey, so. Things happen. And unfortunately, this is one of those situations where I feel like the truth isn't as sexy as the speculation. So, sometimes, like I said, it's a tough sport. You want to be 95% going into March, or do you want to be 65%? So,
I think in the case of Steveson, the other thing that Brandon's got to balance here is like not just getting him right for the NCAA tournament. He's got to be right 2 weeks later for the Olympic trials as well. So it's not just like that's a thing that I don't think, there's been a lot of discussion about all these athletes taking the Olympic year, but of the athletes that are currently competing and still have their eyes on the Olympic trials, these are the things like you look at Penn State, how they've been trying to balance, like they haven't wrestled any, I think there was a lot of talk about Penn State not wrestling a dual meet in over a month. But I think what they did and how they laid out their schedule was focusing on April, that fine line, that fine balance of peaking in March, maintaining that peak until the second week of April. And what does that entail? And I think, when you're Brandon Eggum thinking about a guy like Gable Steveson, who made the finals of Final X last year, this guy is a legitimate contender. He's not just one of those guys that is trying out the Olympic red shirt. I don't know if that's the correct term, but I think there's a lot of guys trying out the Olympic red shirt year with not the intention of making the Olympic team. That's not the case with Gable Steveson. He's a guy, I think, pretty odds-on favorite to make the team. In my opinion, if he continues to grow and progress the way he's been, I think he's definitely in the mix to make the Olympic team. So I think there's even more pressure because that's part of the recruiting process. When I'm sure part of the process when you're Brandon Eggum recruiting Gable Steveson is like, okay, what's your plan? What's your plan for me to make the 2020 Olympic team? Because I ain't waiting until 2024. I'm going to come here. I'm going to win a national title. I'm going to make the Olympic team in 2020. So I think those are added pressures, added considerations that a guy like Brandon Eggum has on his plate when making those game time decisions. Should I wrestle? Should I not? How is this going to play out coming into Big Tens, NCAA tournament, Olympic trials, all those things? There's added layers to, those quote unquote game time decisions, right?
Yeah, and here's another factor to bring up, and I think this is not one that's going to be a surprise to anyone, but if this national championship this year, the Division I's, was anywhere other than Minneapolis, I believe Gable would take that Olympic red shirt because, it's, the family moved here to Minnesota when Gable was still in middle school. They've basically been part of the wrestling community here in Minnesota through Apple Valley and the Minnesota Storm. So again, if it was anywhere else, I think Gable would take a red shirt, but it's something about these Gophers want to win a national title in Minnesota. Not a whole lot of athletes really have that opportunity on the regular. I mean, each year, each state, you got those kids and whatnot. But this is a wrestling wild state. I mean, I think I looked up the stat. There actually are more wrestlers in Minnesota than there are hockey players. As hard as that is to believe, at least on the boys' side, because girls' hockey is also exploding here too. Another side note, but. The fact that Gable is going to probably wrestle here, and he knows it. But the thing is, he's born in 2000. He's still not even 20 years old yet. So you've got a kid that still he can take that grind right now. He's not throwing like, all right, smarter, not harder. This kid's just going harder. So and maybe and I don't take this the wrong way, but maybe the situation that Gable was dealing with the off the mat issues maybe turn out to be a healthy blessing in disguise in terms of his physical ability, because he didn't go through the first part of the season and that grind. He didn't get chewed through Vegas or something like that. So maybe that issue that he was dealing with and being off the team for 6 months, he was still working out, is going to save his body a little bit more going into that stretch run. So he's not battered and bruised coming off nationals and only has 2 weeks to heal. He won't be as battered and bruised as maybe the rest of the field that they didn't take an Olympic red shirt and they're trying to go through this process, or they're trying to win the nationals to be their qualifier.
Right. No, I agree. I
mean, it's a weird silver lining to put to what happened, but still.
But I mean, you go through the situation. So, I'm sure that's a talking point. Like, hey, let's turn this into a positive. It was whatever the situation was. And I don't want to speculate about that, but it kept him off the mat. But yeah, hey, it preserved your body. So it may have turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So I agree with you there. And because that's, we discussed it yesterday. I mean, half the battle. Actually, this is actually a conversation I was having with Kyle Snyder. Was in the office yesterday, and we were talking about,
nice name drop, man. Nice name drop.
Yeah. But we were talking about, in one of the discussions that we were having is like, he anticipates competing for another decade, and so we're talking about what's that look like. He's like, for me.
Ask
and I
Ask Bruce.
Right.
Get Baumgartner's take on that.
How do you keep that level of excitement? And I think that's one of those things like, that you have to consider when you're coaching an athlete that is going to have a senior level career. Like, how do you structure his training in such a way that keeps him fresh, motivated, excited, relatively injury-free through 5 years of college wrestling? And that's always really difficult. And, even a simple thing, going back to Brayton Lee, the simple thing of a flu, like, what? Brayton Lee could have probably wrestled through that if he had to. If it was the NCAA tournament, Big Ten tournament, Eggum's putting him out there. It's the flu. But, what people don't consider sometimes about wrestling with the flu is, the carryover effect. Like, how much is this going to extend into the week and take away from your training? Are you better off not competing? And when we say not competing, that also means you eliminate a weight descent as well, which is going to deplete your system even more. So, some of those things are larger than just, oh, he's sick. Okay. Could you wrestle if you're sick? Yeah. I can wrestle if I just walk around at my natural weight. But if I have to lose 8 to 10 pounds to get down to weight, and I'm already, physically not at my best, I could still probably do that. But what's that going to do next week to me? Is that possibly going to pull me out of the lineup or not make me at my best the following week? And I'm not sure what Minnesota's schedule looks like next week, but could that have been a consideration for Eggum as well? I'm like, okay, he's sick. We shouldn't wrestle him. We're better off looking down the road, for next week, and getting prepared for a guy that really matters towards the end of the season. And again, this is just speculating on what Minnesota's schedule is this week. I didn't quite do enough of my homework on that.
Well,
to see what
they're here against Minnesota, Minnesota Ohio State on Sunday. So it's a Sunday night match. So, granted, Elijah Cleary is not, he's not the buzzsaw that we have at other weights, but he's definitely a capable guy. So that's one of those things. Like if you're going out there less than 100%, and a guy like Cleary can knock you off. So that's one thing that goes to your point. One thing I also do want to bring up in closing out the Minnesota discussion is guess what they didn't do? No Brayton Lee, no Gable Steveson. Guess what didn't happen? You didn't get a free hand raise. There was no forfeit. Michigan fans that went to that duel to see Mason Parris wrestle, guess what? They still got to see him wrestle. No, they did not get to see him wrestle Gable Steveson, but they still got to see him wrestle. And you know what? Garrett Joles, he got thrown out there. He's battling for the spot with Hunter Ritter at 197. He's like, guess what? You're going to have to meet this monster out there. And guess what? He did give up the 6, but the opportunity still existed that he didn't give up 6. It's not a free 6. You didn't steal a match from the paying spectators there. So, and that's one thing that, it's very rare. I know Minnesota, I think, forfeited a weight earlier this year. Might have been last year. I can't remember when it happened, but it was one of those things like they never forfeit weights. So that's one thing that a credit to Eggum and his staff there. Okay, we know what's going to happen. We've got bodies to fill those weights, and that's hard to do on the road. You actually have to bring extra guys on the road. A lot of teams only travel with maybe 11, 12 guys. I think, Matt, what's the limit? I think 15 you can travel with, but how many people are going to spend that many extra hotel rooms and things like that for guys they know that aren't going to make it? We saw that with Oklahoma State last year. They had brought, I think, earlier this year, one guy, but he didn't quite make it. There was a skin check issue. So, bringing extra people on the road to avoid a forfeit too, it might cost your program a little bit of money, but I think it definitely helps the sport in some respect.
For sure. And I think, I don't know if they've changed the rules or the regulations within the Big Ten since I departed, but I believe that they have a roster, a travel limit of 15. 15 eligible guys. That I do believe you can also take red shirts on the road with you as well if you need a workout partner. Obviously, those guys wouldn't be competing, but you can take those extra kids on the road occasionally.
Unless you pull them like Penn State did with Mark Hall.
Right. Oh, hey, you're here. Do you want to wrestle?
Hey, you want to wrestle Carver?
Yeah. So I think that typically the Big Ten teams will travel their max limit of 15. So, and of those 15, typically, what do? You probably take an extra 25 and an extra heavyweight if you can, because those are, if a guy goes down in practice or gets hurt, warming up or wherever, and it's not like you can bump a 33 down to 25, or you could bump a 97 up to heavyweight if you really wanted to. But typically what Big Ten teams do, they will travel a 25 and a heavyweight if they have that on their roster. So I think that's great. We talked about it a little bit yesterday, but seeing 10 guys compete just lends credibility to the sport of wrestling. I think this is an interesting point, because that maybe we can wrap up the show with is, filling those 10 weight classes is a critical thing. And I think you can speak to it because you've worked more closely with the NWCA on the importance of promoting dual meets, growing the visibility of our sport, growing our home bases through dual meets. And one of the things that, lessens the credibility of our sport is like, wait a second, how can you not even put a full roster out on the mat here? You're a Big Ten team and you can't put a full team out there? What's going on here?
Yeah, one thing also to consider too is forfeits at home. And I know we had a situation talking about that Virginia Tech Binghamton match. Well, Binghamton forfeited 2 weights at home. And this also, we go into a tangent on this. I know Nick Corey at Track Wrestling also just wrote a feature about, if certain coaches could change the rules. Kerry Collat, of course, talked about his policy or thought about redshirting. And then Tom Ryan, echoes something that I've also been championing ever since the NCAA instituted the allowances for football to have athletes playing 4 games and it not count to burn your red shirt. Well, that's 4 out of 12. That's, what's the math on that? That's what, a third of the season already, or, whatever it is. Why can't we do in a sport like wrestling, which again you can't fully fund a starting lineup because you have 10 wrestlers, you have 9.9 scholarships. You have athletes that you're redshirting. That do you blow the red shirt for one dual meet? I mean, with a situation with Lou Dupre out, well, there was one other 184-pounder on the roster at Binghamton. As a freshman, you're going to throw him out there to the Wolves against Hunter Bolin and burn his year, or give him that ability. It's like, okay, you know what? this isn't going to hurt us. Let's throw them out there. You save yourself a forfeit, especially at home. I'm not sure I didn't really dig into the 33-pound issue, but there's a situation where you're at home, you should have those bodies. And in situations we've got a Binghamton that didn't have a body there. So that's kind of you sit there and look at it. Well, why? Can we prevent this? And that's where I think that 4-date rule that football has, if any sport can benefit from it in a team format, I think more it's wrestling. I don't think there's any other place. We've talked about it for years, even before Tom was pointing out that you can take a lineman and make him a guard or a safety and make him a receiver. If you've got an injury, wrestling, we can't do that. Like you said, you can't pull a 41 down to 25 to fill a spot. So I think in a sport like us, we need that thing to help alleviate the forfeits. Hopefully, maybe this convention will bring something up that might be thrown on the table, if not at the NWCA convention, because again, the NWCA and the NCAA have a pretty good line of communication there. There are people from staff down there, but to the point of putting 10 guys on the mat, that is crucial. And again, we all know that there are room guys on every single one of these teams. They will never see the lineup. The coaches know they'll never see the lineup. The guys are there. They might get some books or something, or they're a state champ that wanted to be on a D1 team, and they're toiling away. And after 2 years, they quit. Well, what the incentive maybe is okay. That match you get. Okay, let's throw them in there. Why not throw the workout partner that is probably never going to start? Okay, you're redshirting a true freshman workout partner, essentially. Put him in the dual meet. Don't give up 6 and bring a couple, bring his family into the dual meet. Sell a couple more hot dogs or something. I just think that sometimes I think we're too selfish with the red shirts. And again, that goes to Colat's point in that story is, give them 4 and 5 or something like that. There's so many different ways to solve the forfeit problem. It's just, we're such a unique sport, but we have to be crafted into what everybody else is doing. But at the same point, we still have to think outside of the box. It's almost like a chicken and egg situation. A lot of stuff I threw out there.
No. I mean, I think there's a lot of things to unpack in this conversation. But number one, let's go to the nature of our sport. It's a hand-to-hand, it's a combat sport. So the likelihood of being injured is much higher than other sports, even though there's injuries everywhere. But there's a much greater likelihood that you're going to get injured day in and day out in your practice room than the majority of other sports. So just let's think about this. Just carrying a full practice squad is hard. Mm-hmm. Just running a full practice at this time of year is very, very hard for most D1 teams. Typically, you walk into any D1 room and I bet you see probably, anywhere from 4 to 10 guys on a bike.
The bikes are full.
Right. The bikes are full. It's that time of year. I mean, you're getting dinged up. There's flu. That's a reality. We're in the middle, we're in the middle of a winter. We're stressing our bodies nonstop. So we're more susceptible for not only injury, but sickness. So just number one, carrying a full practice squad to get a functional practice is difficult. Number two, for most teams, roster management is a challenge. And so when you have one guy go down, say case in point, Binghamton's, 84 went down, DePrey went down. They had a backup, a freshman. You're not going, you wouldn't just throw him out there just to throw him out. But if you had the ability to, you would, if you wouldn't jeopardize the red shirt. You couldn't, I couldn't look a parent in the eye or my AD in the eye and say, why did you wrestle this kid? It's like, well, we had to fill a lineup. It would be hard for me to justify that I wasted a kid's year because I wanted to fill my lineup. Like, that would be hard for me in my heart of hearts, even though I wanted to send 10 guys out there. Like, I'm burning a guy's year just over one match, just so it looks better that I filled my lineup.
And the optics there is, the final score was 47-0. What's the optics? Okay, well, 43-0. No disrespect to those kids, because again, Kyle's having a pretty tough year. They started out pretty well, and they've just, hit some bumps along the road. So it's not like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm throwing Binghamton on the bus here by any means. But again, that's an example of what we're talking about and how we can avoid those forfeits, because, and you bring up roster management. It's not just a thing at Northwestern. It's not just a thing at Hofstra. Very, very few Division I programs really allow you to carry more than 30, 31 athletes. So, that is a reality. And you take your red shirt. Say if you're going to red shirt all your freshmen, well, then boom, you're taking 10 of your guys out of there. There's 20. And then all of a sudden now you're in a situation where we're redshirting all these guys. Well, some of those guys don't need to redshirt either. They're workout guys. You know they're never going to see the lineup. I don't know.
And you know
Maybe
what?
It's the recruiting promises too.
But for most of these guys, JB, if they had the ability to put their colors on one time, you know what, coaches? I bet you might see a check in your mailbox down the road just over those experiences. Hey, I was a varsity wrestler at one point, right? I got to put the singlet on. I got to be the guy that went out there and represented my institution. And that was my only chance because – most of these guys are very realistic with themselves. If you're number 3, 4 on the roster, probably not going to bump up and be a starter anytime soon. So just the ability to create an opportunity for some of these guys that may never be able to compete, to have that opportunity. But two, just from a credibility standpoint, putting 10 guys out, putting 20 guys out per dual meet is very, very important. And, when I pressed Mike Moyer about this, I'm like, Mike, this seems like a pretty logical solution. I know there's some things to navigate here. I was like, but why isn't everybody on board with this? And again, is like, well, and this is a frustration I've had. It's like, it's the smaller mid-major program saying this is going to create a further separation between the haves and have-nots. Like, say Iowa right now, like, oh, Wilkie can't go. We're just going to use Assad. That's not a good example right now because they've already pulled Assad's red shirt, but they're like, well, that's creating a further separation between the haves and haves not, because what's Binghamton doing? They've got a top 5 guy at 184. Their backup's a redshirt freshman. And so they're saying, oh, that's going to create a separation between the haves and have-nots because the Iowa has a Wilkie, a Brands, an Assad back to back, at the, depth in their weight class. So I think what mid-major coaches are saying, well, top-tier D1 programs have a depth advantage over us as well. So
does it mean you have to forfeit a weight? I mean, that's just one of those things. I mean, right? I know mid-majors that have guys they bring in for 2 years and they're gone. I mean, the attrition rate amongst, they come in, they're freshman, sophomore, and then they either join a fraternity or they realize wrestling's not for them. They get too deep in their major. They're an engineer. There are so many different reasons why people quit wrestling. It's not like some of them just had enough wrestling. There are logical reasons why people stop wrestling. It doesn't necessarily make you any less of an individual because I have other priorities in my life, and being a bench warmer isn't one of them. I want to get on with my life. Some people leave the sport with a bad taste in their mouth because they feel like this is something that they're looked negatively upon because they didn't finish it out. Oh, you didn't ever go to nationals? Shit, man, I didn't even start for my high school team. I didn't even start wrestling until I was 16 years old. Yeah, I got a little bit of things I look back in the back of my mind going, man, I wish I'd have done this. I wish I'd have done this. I mean, maybe if I wouldn't have, had to leave the team my senior year, things would have been different. No, just you're part of the team. Let's get that opportunity for those kids. The mid-majors have guys on their team that they're redshirting because they're that special kid that they want to be able to groom for 4 years. Giving them that 4 dual option would only help that because it's still, you can put him in a live action situation with the team, and guess what? He may get something out of it. You may realize he's ready to go right then and there, and you can save that red shirt in case somebody gets hurt later down the road. Then again, the NCAA is handing out 6th, 7th, and 8th years like candy right now, so who knows? I mean, like I said, there's so many different tangents to go on with this red shirt, this 4-date kind of discussion that's been, a real big talking point across pretty much the country. And there's really, I haven't seen any single format that makes sense and checks every single box that's going to make everybody happy, and such is our sport.
Yeah, and I think one more sidebar to this would be, as a college coach, one of my concerns with my red shirts, especially the second half of the year, is how much am I going to get out of them? How much are they going to continue helping my guys? Because the motivation isn't quite there, because sometimes guys are like, okay, I'm just redshirting, and the opportunities to compete in the second half of the year for red shirts are very few and far between.
You got Edinburgh and the National Collegiate Open are pretty much the only real two ones you get in February.
So for me, as a former college coach, I wasn't worried about, when I was on the road, I was always worried about my guys back at home. What are they going to be doing? What are they going to be getting into? if they weren't competing in that second half of their redshirt year consistently week in and week out. But if they, if there was an opportunity to at least communicate to the guys, hey, guys, you got to be ready to go. Like, even if you're in redshirt, if we got a guy going down, we can throw you in there. So you got to make sure you're living the lifestyle, you're doing all those things, and just reinforcing like some type of urgency to continue to stay on the right track during your redshirt year. That's probably a minor discussion point in the equation. That's would not even be a part of the legislative conversation, but from a coaching conversation, that's a big deal. Like, keeping these guys focused, especially when you're trying to focus on your varsity guys the last 2 months of the season. Like, how are we going to make sure our red shirts and our freshmen and our non-starters are engaged and active and in the moment with my team?
Yeah, maybe that's something that, because you and Carrie have the way here on the RUDIS Podcast Network, if that is the actual title for it. But, Carrie's, been outspoken about his thoughts on the matter. And, maybe it's not the 4-date situation that keeps those guys engaged. Maybe it's the fact that you give them, okay, you get 5 years to compete in 4 postseasons. So that's the thing. You can wrestle X amount of dual meets. Once you get to the qualification stages, if you're not there, well, guess what? You've got this clock. So maybe that's the situation, and then the hardship year comes up when you get an Anthony Cassar type situation. So maybe that's the better proposals. All right, I when Carrie first told me about it years ago, I'm like, yes, yeah, 4 and 5, that's great. But then, devil's in the details, man. Devil's in the details with all this stuff. Immediately, people think about how they can game the system. So it's how to cheat the rule, how to exploit the rule is usually what happens when this type of stuff comes up.
But that's the nature of the beast. That's what you're trying to do. Like, you're trying to push the envelope on every rule. I mean, that's your job as a college coach. I think that's your job in any profession you're in, is like, push the heck out of every rule. Like, I think that's what they're doing with the RTCs. And I don't mind that, because to gain a competitive advantage, that's your job. That's what you're hired to do, to get a competitive advantage wherever you can find it. And
is there a difference between competitive advantage and spirit of the rule, though? That's the one thing that I'm looking at. Are you exploiting a rule because it's a competitive advantage, or are you exploiting the rule because you see a loophole? I mean, there's the one thing. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can push the line and still be ethical and preserve the spirit of why a rule exists, or the spirit of the rule. It's not like, well, there's this gray area, I'm going to sit here in it because it's not illegal. Versus, it's not illegal isn't the same as legal. It's
right.
By definition it is, but it's like, that's the question. Do you give that competitive advantage? In that, do you live in the gray area, or like, again, the spirit of the rule is, I think, where I think we get away from is, maybe it's human nature. It's like, well, the first thing you want to do is be able to, well, how can we get around this? Well, how are people going to exploit this? Versus, let's see the benefit of how this would work, and then worry about the byproduct that is probably fixable later. I think we prevent legislation because of the byproduct without the actual long-term situation of where it could be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to our discussion yesterday with the whole ducking thing. Are there some coaches that do duck? Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. The majority don't. I think there's mitigating circumstances like Minnesota with Steveson and Lee being sick and being dinged up. I think the majority, 9 times out of 10, I think that's kind of what happens in the situation. We're just not privy to it. Like we discussed yesterday, I think it's similar, with these rules, like the letter of the law or the intent. Like, I don't think most coaches would intentionally abuse it. I think if it's there, they would take advantage of it, though. And I think it's, hey, let's provide the opportunity and see how it's utilized, instead of just assuming the worst. But that's the NCAA, man. I mean, every rule they make, that's why the rule book's 400 pages long. It's not for the guys that are wanting to do it the right way. It's that 1% that's going to look to game the system, break the rule, abuse the rule. And so they always defer. Yes. Yeah.
Like with Dustin Schlater ending the Big Ten. He's like, all right, well, he was the 1 seed. Well, no, we're going to medical forfeit. So, you pull a seed, you enter him, you default him. Well, I think the word gamesmanship was thrown in there. And then with Suriano at Penn State not being pulled until, the day of, preventing a redraw of the bracket, preventing another athlete from getting in. Rules change because of those situations. And yes, again, was it? It's that gray area versus the spirit of the rules. So, we could talk about that for another 5 hours if you want to. But in terms of, again, I think we need to be less reactive about the one situation that causes everything to go haywire versus the 100 that are beneficial. So, because when we see something that goes wrong, they've actually been pretty good to rectify it in pretty quick action.
Yeah, and I think that's natural that we always point out the negatives of every situation. But I think if I were to present something to the NCAA, like, look at all these positive things that have been going on when we have done these things. Don't necessarily look at the bad things. Like, and now we're going to get into another rabbit hole, and I want to get in this rabbit hole at a certain point. That's the RTCs, but I think some people on the one side can look at the RTCs and say it's a negative thing for NCAA wrestling, but it's a positive net gain overall for USA wrestling. But again, I think that's a sidebar that we're I don't think we want to get down in that rabbit hole yet. We're over an hour again.
Episode 2, man. Well, two of this area, episode 118. Yeah. So I don't know, Matt, have we made that kind of official now? It's not like I'm just guest hosting now. This is kind of going to be a thing. Yeah,
it's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing.
In case people are wondering, why am I on two times in a row? Well, yeah, it's kind of a thing now.
Yeah, so we'll jump into that. We'll get into that, and I'm excited about it, JB. I appreciate the show today. I appreciate the conversation. Excited about where this is going to go, and we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, man.
Okay, take care.